Howdy, I'm Mark from Nomad Boatbuilding. Today we're going to leather some oars. Now whenever I leather oars, I like to get my work up off the bench top, and I like to use these little devices that I call bench jacks. Think of it like a little tiny sawhorse. Use a bit of pipe insulation just to protect the oars. And here we've got an off-the-shelf set of oars that are made locally. These are Sitka spruce. They're a little on the chunky side for my taste. I don't think they're very elegant, but they're a functional oar, and that's very high quality wood. So before you start doing any work on the oars, you should really deal with maintenance on those oars first. Whether they're brand new and need to get varnished for the first time, or they're older oars and they need to have their varnish refreshed, or perhaps you have them painted or oiled, or whatever your preference is. Get as much of that done as you can, because once you put the leathers on, they're going to be on there permanently until you decide to re-leather them. It's not something we take off for maintenance, and so you want a good solid finish underneath those leathers so that we don't have any damaging that happens due to water incursion. So the next thing we need to decide is where we're going to put our leathers. I like to use oars with just a long leather loom on there that is longer than I need it to be, and I like oars that I can switch from boat to boat, and for that reason I don't use what we call buttons. Buttons are the little collar that will keep those oars in one position. By getting used to not having to row with buttons, it gives you a little more flexibility. I can slide the oars in, use them cross-handed. If I want a little more leverage, I can slide them out. I can move them from boat to boat, and I don't have to worry about the beam of the boat and where those oar locks are set. Now, if that's not to your taste, and it is not the taste of my customer here, then you're going to want to decide exactly where we're going to put those buttons. And so what I like to do, if somebody is bringing me a set of oars, I'll ask them to put the oars in the boat, line them up on the oar locks, get them centered, make sure they have the clearance between them that I desire, and usually I have at least an inch per oar, so like 2 inches as sort of a bare minimum clearance, because you want room for your knuckles to not smash against each other. Otherwise you're going to be rowing cross-handed, which is fine, but not everybody wants to do that. So 2 to 3 inch room in between those oars, just to make sure that your thumbs aren't getting schmucked, because we quite often use oars with our thumbs locked over the ends like this. Not everybody does, but that's just one technique some people like. Once you've got those oars centered up on your oar locks, just take a piece of tape and just drop them on the oars where you want those oar locks to sit. And I would say putting them on the face that is most critical, the face that those buttons will bear against in order to keep those oars positioned, is what you really want to know. When we get to the workshop, we'll kind of offset that by the thickness of the button, which is probably anywhere from, at a bare minimum, I would say ½ an inch up to probably about 3/4 of an inch might be an average button. But if you're doing a big heavy boat that's going to take a lot of abuse, you might go for an even bigger button, say an inch wide. Now those buttons are usually just made of a wrapping of leather. In some cases you can get plastic buttons that clamp on there, not really to my taste, but some people use them. Or you can even make a Turk's head lashing that wraps around there, and it's decorative. It does the job. I don't think it's as good as a leather button personally, but some people are perfectly fine with it. Now my customer did not give me any masking tape markings on these oars, which I find a little bit frustrating. He did give me some measurements. They're a little bit rough. So he did specify that the oar locks are 45 inches between themselves. He didn't specify if that's to the center of the oar lock, which I would hope it is. But anyway, he did say his other oars that we did for him, we had about 21 inches to the inside of the buttons. And so we'll go with that dimension. In theory, that should give him that wiggle room that he needs between those oars. So we'll start with a couple pieces of masking tape. We'll grab a tape measure. I'm just going to mark the 21 inches. So this is representing my oar lock horn right here. Do the same thing on both. So if that marks the inside of my oar lock, I want to add on what my button thickness is going to be. And we're going to say, I think 5/8 is going to be a good number. So I'm just going to mark 5/8 outside of that. Okay, and then I'm just going to put another piece of masking tape on here. We're just going to wrap that all the way around. Just like so. And that's going to be our critical dimension. We got to make sure that our leathers go up to that mark and are consistent from oar to oar. So that's why I'm marking that all the way around. And I'm not doing that in pencil because it's a bit easy for pencil lines to get to sort of disappear on you when you start monkeying around with the leather, especially because the leather is going to be wet. It can erase those pencil marks. So there we go. That is going to be my critical dimension, and we'll even write on here, just so I don't forget, we're going to go with a 5/8 inch button. So I'll just make a note of it on there. Now the question is, how long do you make the collars themselves? And I usually go with a nominal 6 inches. You don't really need to make them particularly long if you've got the buttons on there. And if you look at the commercial plastic ones, they're usually about 3 or 4 inches. I think 6 inches looks better, so we go with about that. So we'll go with 6, maybe even 6.5. I'll see how much I can squeeze out of the leather that I have. So now we need to figure out exactly how long our piece of leather needs to be to wrap around this. And for that, I go very simple. I like to just use a piece of paper. So just using any piece of paper, we won't worry about the length. All I'm going to do is I'm going to just start by putting it here on top of the oar. Kind of eyeball it along center. I'm just going to tack that in place. And then we're just going to wrap this right the way around. And what I want to sort of look for is that my edges line up by the time I'm done. If they don't, I might need to adjust the center line a little bit. But for the most part, this should be fine. And it may not line up all the way because this is conical, or at least in theory our loom is a little bit conical, so it may not be the same both ends. So we're just going to mark this with an arrow pointing towards the handle of the oar. And I'm just looking to see where I can see through to the other side. I'm just going to mark that top and bottom. Now if your oar is not really symmetrical, if it's got a little bit of a hump to it, you might find that this cannot be a straight line. This might have to be a bit of a curve. Now we're going to apply this leather wet, so in theory you should be able to get it to stretch if there's a little bit of shape to it, but not always. I had one set of oars, in fact I think it was the last set of oars this gentleman brought me, had enough of a bow in it right in the loom area that I couldn't get this joint to close up. I had to cut a second set of leathers for him. So I'm just marking it top, bottom, and in the middle, right where I can sort of just see that paper transmit through. With that done, I'm going to lay this piece of paper on a cutting mat, take a ruler, check it against those lines. We're just going to cut those out. Okay, now the one thing I want to do, I've got the oar, the direction marked, and you can see how this is conical by a little bit. I also want to add to that which oar it's for, because these oars are not going to be symmetrical. So this one, we'll call this oar A and the other one B. So this is for oar A. If I reapply this, it should fit quite nicely. We'll just drop that on there. I'm not going to tape up the other end right away. Actually, remember this has to cover our tape. Oh no, it doesn't. Now I don't remember if I covered the tape or not when I was laying this out. But as I wrap that around, that indeed, yes, I must have been covering that tape because I can see that it's just slightly oversized. Not down here at the bottom, it's quite perfect here at the bottom, but at the top we're a little bit wrong. So it looks like I could stand to shave just the tiniest hair off the top end. That should be good. That ought to work. Okay, so if you're not 100%, that's fine. If you're slightly small, that's better than slightly big, because we can probably get this to stretch, but we can't get it to shrink very much. I mean, it'll shrink some. We'll be cutting the leather dry, soaking it, and then sewing it on wet, in which it can stretch a little bit, but then it's going to shrink back. So we want to be kind of close to our finished dimension right off the bat. So we'll do the same thing again. This time I won't screw it up. And I'll mark this below our collar there. Bring that around. Arrow, which oar it is, B. And I'm putting a mark in the middle just for reference, as I said, because it'll show us if it's got a curve or not when I put the straight edge against it. Okay. So we cut that out. And now the next thing I want to do is I want to mark my length on here. So I'm just going to mark this at the 6 inches I was thinking about. Maybe we'll go 6.5 if I got the leather for it. And so with that marked out, I'm just going to pop this back on here. What I want to do is I want to bring this around. I want to make sure the top end jives up. And then I'm going to mark where the bottom end matches. Because if you just try and cut it square, there's a good chance that it's not going to come out square. In theory, we should be marking these tapers off of a center line, but this is going to work out okay. So just leave that one that. We'll do the same thing with this. Okay, we're using a type of leather called Latigo. This is specifically intended for use in outdoor applications, bits of rigging on a sailboat, saddles and stuff like that, any sort of gear that needs to live outdoors. What I want to do right now is just eyeball exactly where I can squeeze these out of. And I'd like to get some buttons out of here too. And the buttons will have to come off one side. You know what? I think I'm going to pull my buttons off here first, because then I know at least that I'll have some length for doing that. And I don't know exactly how much length I need for my buttons. In fact, I think these are the scraps from my last set of oars, and I'm going to assume I pulled them off this one side, so you know, one of these guys is probably fine. So I have a fairly modest little leather working kit here. Okay, so here's a piece of leather I've got that I'm going to make my collars out of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pattern here, and I'm just going to see if it squares up with one of the edges, and usually it doesn't, so we're not going to worry too much about that. We'll leave a little bit of trimming material. So I'm just going to tape it right down. Put one across here. We want to make sure we leave our corners exposed so that we can measure from those. Okay, getting it lying down nice and flat. Okay, now I'm just going to throw that on there to hold it. Now the big trick here is that we need to actually expand the size of this pattern by a certain margin. What you can do is take a strip of leather, wrap it around the oar. It is basically about 2 thicknesses of the leather larger than the pattern itself. That's to make up for the thickness of the leather itself. But in fact, 2 thicknesses is just a hair under, and so that is probably just perfect for getting the amount of stretch that we need out of it. So I'm going to call that good. We'll cut the other side as well. We'll undercut this just a hair towards the inside of the leather so that it so we get a better fit at the face of the leather, the smooth face. It's just a little bit of insurance to make sure that we're not going to end up being too big. Okay, and now with that done, we can trim off the tail end. And of course, we save all these scraps of leather for leathering clamps and things like that. Nothing nicer than a properly leathered set of clamps. Okay. Trim away the fuzzy bits. Mark our handle end and which oar it's for. And then the thing I would like to do before I move on, there's 2 things actually. One of them is I'm going to take this little tool on the bottom side. I'm going to take that edge out, that corner. The top side I'm going to leave alone because we're going to have the button on there. And over here what I can do is I can just very lightly take the fuzz off the inside corner here, just to allow it to sort of come together a little easier. Okay, so next we need to think about our stitches. And so I have this off-the-shelf little chisel set. I'm going to go with the wider spaced one, so it's going to be like this. I don't know how far apart these are. These are like, they're almost a 1/4 inch apart. What I would generally do is I would plan to have these stitches come about 1/8 of an inch in, so we get these sort of a squarish size stitching pattern. So I'm going to draw a line just using my fingers here, a strong 1/8 of an inch, both sides. And then we're going to want a starter course, so let's go right off the bottom where the where we've shaved off that corner, so that'll be where we start. So what I would be doing then is starting my first hole right there. This is probably not the best thing for punching my holes because I don't want to beat up my cutting mat too much. Or we could do it up here on the edge. Just make sure we're coming all the way through. When we're using these, you want to make sure when you do your next set of row of holes, you park your chisel into the last one to keep it even. That works out pretty good with my last hole just landing right on the edge. Okay, I switched to a little piece of high-density polyethylene as a backing for this because I was really starting to chew up my little cutting mat here. Didn't want to make too much of a mess out of that. Now, of course, you could also use just an awl for punching these holes. You just got to lay them out carefully. It's certainly slower, but it can be done. You could just work with your needle as well, just pushing the needles through. And of course, you can always use hole punches. Hole punches leave holes that are a little oversized in my opinion. They don't look very good when you're done, but you can certainly do that. I would say a set of hole chisel is definitely kind of a nicer way to go. Of course, there's a bit of an investment there, but if you're going to do leather work with any regularity, these are certainly a little bit of a game changer. Okay, so just a basin of warm water, not hot. We're just gonna put these guys in here, and I'm gonna leave these to soak for probably about 15 or 20 minutes. In fact, what I should do is I should probably just leave one of them out. And the one I'm going to work on first, we'll soak that for about 15 or 20 minutes. Once I've got this one sort of halfway done, I'll put that one in the bath, and then it'll be ready when I need it. Okay, now I'm going to use just a couple elastics to hold this in place. Never tried that before, but I see no reason why that won't work. So one on down there, one up near the top. And probably the best place to put the seam is on maybe on the back side. If you think about how an oar is being used, normally it's either bearing on the top or the bottom in the oar lock, and then against maybe the face of the oar lock. So I'm going to put it on the back side. At least that's what makes sense to me. Maybe it doesn't matter. We've got these guys lined up, and I'm going to start sewing them on down at the bottom, working my way towards the loom end. I like using sailmaker's needles. Okay, the ones I like are these. These are Smith & Son. So this is like a mix pack, and I think I picked these up from Hossey Sailmakers in Port Townsend. But I mean, you can find them elsewhere. You're probably going to pay like 20 bucks or something for one of these little packages. Well worth it though. They're a triangular needle, but they've got sort of soft shoulders. I'm just going to do like a regular overhand knot. It's not actually your best knot, because you know what, with an overhand knot, you do in like tail end of something like that, you can pull it right apart. You want to get that to not do that, you need to do a square knot. There we go. Now here's the thing about a square knot. If I were to take one of these legs and pull it, I can get it apart. So you can break a square knot, is what I'm saying. So another option though, if you wanted to do like the equivalent of an overhand knot, but you don't want it to come apart, you could do a double overhand, or you could do a figure-8 knot. You do one of those, so that one's now a figure-8 knot there. That's not going to come apart. Now what I want to do is I want to find the middle of the bite, which is about there. I'll pull my needles carefully down, trying to not get it to knot up and kink up and make a mess. What I've done is I've doubled it over. I've made a knot at the one end of the free ends of it, and then I've just slit it so that so it matches up where the loop of the doubling lands. I'm just going to use a bit of beeswax to just stiffen these up a little bit. Sometimes it's helpful to have a little awl on hand just to help open up those lacing holes a little bit. And we're going to be using what's known as a baseball stitch. So the baseball stitch is done such that you come from the inside. And when leathering oars, there's a good reason for that, and that is if you're trying to come from the outside, you're going to be constantly jabbing the needles into the surface of the wood, which would be less than ideal. So pulling the first one closed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a double pass just at this first stitch. What I'm trying to do right now is I'm just trying to avoid actually skewering the other thread as I'm coming through there, because I want it to slide freely. There we go. Right, so we pull those nice and tight, and in a perfect world we'll keep these threads nice and flat as we do our stitching. So just groping around to find the hole on the inside of this one. And then the other one. What the baseball stitch does nicely is it pulls the edge of this the leather down into the stitch, which is exactly what you want, which is why they do it on baseballs, obviously, so you don't have a pronounced ridge that would interfere with the game. See, I'm fumbling around to try and find the hole. I think that's why some people will just go ahead and let the needles make their own holes. I think that's a little more effort though. I've done it that way as well. It works fine. Depends on the leather, how supple the leather is. This leather is probably a number, I think roughly like a number 8 ounce. So that's about 1/8 of an inch thick. Now some folks might find it easier to leave long loops after each stitch, that you can come back in here and you can just use your fingers to pull them tight. I find it a little more difficult, and I find the loops sometimes tend to kind of get tangled up on you a little bit easily. So that's one reason I don't really do that, but just want to show you that it is certainly a possibility. You do have to make sure that you're pulling them tight in the correct order though. So you can see right here as I'm tightening this one up, all these other guys are kind of tucked underneath it. They're all kind of getting tangled up there. The other thing that happens, that all this twisting that happens, which is natural when you're just working with the needle, you tend to rotate it as you go, it gets more and more twisted up, and you don't have the same opportunities to untwist it as you work the way you do if you're just trying to, if you're doing it one stitch at a time. See, all that fussing around, I swear it took longer than if I were to just do it the way I've been doing it, which is just going one stitch at a time and tightening as I go. In each case, I'm always starting the next row with the same needle, the one on my right hand side, so that we get an even pull and we don't get tangled up. You can't really feel the hole on the back side because of the suede texture on the inside of the leather. You just kind of gonna grope around and hope you hit it. It's coming together pretty good. I probably could have made this just the tiniest bit bigger, but it's hard to judge. And I have done it where they're oversized, and I absolutely didn't like that when it was a little bit loose. That didn't feel good at all. Okay, so there we go. Now it looks like I've come out, get these elastics out of the way. I'm like just a hair long on this one side. I don't quite know how that came to be, but I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to tie off my knot and it'll get buried under the button. That's good and tight. That's good and tight. So to finish off, we basically come through again the last hole. So that's going right over, pulling a loop right over top, see? We'll do the same thing this way. Bring it up. Okay, so now to tie this off, I'm just going to snug these guys both up. There we go. See, that's nice and tight. And I'm just going to do a square knot. And just kind of suck that knot right up inside there, and that's it. Now that we've got that all tied up, now what I want to do is try and suck this down here, and what you might have to do is put this down on the ground, work it down with your the weight of your body, and just slide it down to our mark. Make sure that looks nice and straight. And now we leave that overnight to dry before we attend to dealing with any buttons. Okay, so there we go. There's step 1, or is that step 2? Maybe it's step 3 or 4. I'm not even sure. All right, our leathers are dry, and the next thing we're going to do is put the buttons on. So the buttons are really just another piece of leather wrapped around, and I like to do buttons Normally I like to make sure they're about a ½ inch thick or something approaching that if I can. So we're a bit limited here because our leather thong is only so long to make this. So if I stack that up, that actually looks pretty good. I think I wouldn't mind a little bit more thickness here. So I might just peel off another one. And what we can do is we can add, we can make a smaller piece that just wraps around on its own, and then we fasten that on and then continue on with the other one on top. So basically make like a filler layer. So the first thing we need to do to even pursue this is we need to skive off the ends. So basically we need to create a scarf joint on the ends of these. And we want that scarf joint to have enough length that as we come around, the top layer lands over that scarf eventually, and it looks consistent all the way around. So I like to make these scarf joints probably about an inch, inch and a half long, something like that. And I find the best tool for it is just a chisel. And I'm just going to scarf it on the back side, like so. I'm just going to bring it down until I'm just at like a feather edge at the bottom. Maybe we'll go about 2 inches long actually, just make it a bit cleaner, smoother transition. And of course, we're trying to get down to a feather edge, so try doing it off that cutting board. It kind of screwing me up a little bit. There we go. So I've gone all the way through to the finished face of the leather, and it's a nice, gentle, roughly 2-inch long scarf joint. And then as we bring this around, what we'll want to do is to just make note of where that scarf ends. And so in theory, I can only get around this far actually this far to match up with that scarf joint to have it come up even. So it feels like I could generally use one more layer of leather on here to make this look about right. Alright, so I've peeled off a little short piece here. I'm just going to mark it for length. So it looks like I'm just about perfect if I run my scarf from about there out. So there we go. If I lay the scarf on there, we'll glue that on. It gives us a pretty even first wrap. That's going to punch up our size of collar. So let me tape that in place and we'll mock this all up before I move further. Okay, so if I bring that around, that's a really nice, generous looking collar right there. That's about 4 layers deep. Each layer is 1/8 of an inch, so it's ½ an inch. And so I'm just going to mark where that tail end of that will be, which is right about there, we'll call it. And so we'll trim that off and we'll skive off the inside of this, leaving the outside ready for taking a nail. Of course, we also want to mark which of these oars this one is for. So this is B. Mark that on here. Mustn't forget that. So in addition to doing what I just did, and I should really even mark on here exactly where this should land on the seam. Let's wrap that around again and have another look. We want this a fairly snug wrapping. But we're using contact cement, so you get one shot at it and that's it. You also want to mark where your wrap ends on the lower portion so that when you go to glue it, we want to glue both sides, and so we need to know where that's going to stop. We also want to rough up that surface just a tiny little bit with some sandpaper just to make sure we get a good bond. So what I'll do is I'll trim this off first, I'll skive it, rewrap it, and then mark the termination point for it. So that's going to be my starting mark over the seam. And if you want, you could knock the corners off of this little skived off piece so that we don't have sharp corners on there. Let me just match my scarf length. Notice I'm scarfing on the back side in both cases just because it's easier. It's going to knock the corners off a tiny bit. You could even leave that last bit a little bit heftier too. So all this gets sanded or roughed up a little bit. That stays smooth. We glue the whole back side and we glue from those marks to the feather edge on the inside. The little filler piece we glue both sides. So I'm just going to tape off where the glue is going to land on here, and I got smarter on the second one and did it while my little temporary this little filler piece is still in place. Whenever you're taping off stuff like this, leave yourself a pull tab, and this works really well here when you have a pull tab that sort of peels off at an angle, I find. That way it's sort of still hanging in pretty close right here at the contact point, but the rest of the tag is out of your way, compared to this one where the tag is more or less in your way. And with that piece pulled off, we'll just sand off the shiny. Just deglossing is usually enough. I've hammered down the knot. This obviously is a much uglier knot than the other side where it's properly buried, but no matter, this will be buried too. So this is a solvent-based contact cement in here. Now I'm sure you could make this work with water-based. And I think I've done this with spray adhesive too, with 3M's High Strength 90, which is basically a contact cement. But I feel like this brushed on variety is probably your best bet. So that the fuzzy side of your straps are probably going to take up a little more contact cement than the smooth side. So I like to, sometimes I double coat those. I'll give them a coat. We'll let that dry, and we'll give them another coat. And do the other side. Now, because this is contact cement, we wait for it to be dry to the touch before we try and put it together. Now I have found contact cement is probably the best stuff for holding leather things together. And there are products out there that are specifically intended for like the shoemaking industry, which are probably still a contact cement. Maybe they're a little more rubbery. By all means, I'm sure one of those would work really well. So the nice thing about contact cement is that it's not a super time critical kind of adhesive, although it is critical that you let it dry up enough, because if you try and put it together wet on wet, it really doesn't work very well. Hence the term contact cement. It glues itself once it makes contact. You let it go too long and it usually doesn't tack. So you got to find that sort of sweet spot when it just stops being tacky to the touch, and then you're good to go. So I'm just going to leave those for a moment and wait for that side to kick off. And then I'm going to come back, I'm going to recoat them, let them kick again, flip it, coat the back sides. That'll be a one coat application on the smooth side, and then we're going to be ready to put them together. I'll hold off doing the collars until I'm doing the smooth side of these guys. All right, these are now dry. These are sort of tack free. They're just ever so slightly tacky. So this is one thing I worry about using. Yeah. So you see that? I don't like that. That bothers me. So I think I'm going to recoat these guys and go freehand. I don't like the way that peeled back. I should have peeled that off while it was wet. That was dumb of me. All right, let's start putting these together. Just want to make sure we're lining up our edge. You got one shot. One shot at doing this right. Okay, that looks good. Okay, and of course my little alignment line is almost invisible.
I want to thank all my subscribers for their ongoing support, their comments, their shares, and good wishes. And I also want to thank all of my followers on Patreon whose monthly pledges support this channel. If you can help us on Patreon, I would really appreciate it. There are links in the corner or down in the description.
I'm rotating the oar mostly to keep the leather from picking up any dirt off the bench. Of course, cleaning the bench might have been a great idea, but why would I do something sensible like that? There we go. Didn't quite land exactly where I wanted to, so I'm not too sure where I screwed up there. Maybe I didn't stretch it enough or whatever. It's okay. It'll be fine. All right, our very last job is just to put a single nail in here to secure it, make sure nothing's going to move. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and drop it right on the center line as I was originally planning. Just a small pilot hole. The only reason I'm even doing that is because I find that if you try and drive a nail into this leather, it tends to wander around. So I'm just using a small ring nail. I'm not even making it go very deep, so you can see it goes in about 3/8 of an inch into the oar itself. Now, do not, and I know there's some of you out there who are thinking it, do not start poking more nails in all the way around this ring thinking you're going to make this better. You will not. What'll happen is you're just going to incur basically a big breaking point right around your oar, because guaranteed you're going to get moisture going in there into all these little holes. Spruce is not the most rot resistant stuff, so it'll start rotting in all those spots. Next thing you know, you've got a weakened spot right where you need the oar to be its strongest. So resist it. One nail is all that it needs to keep all of this from shifting around. The contact cement's going to hold all that together, no problem. Should it fall apart, just take it apart and redo it. Don't just resist the urge to start pounding nails in there. That's what I recommend. Okay, now the last job is just to clean up these edges. Okay, just using my cornering tool, we're just gonna give this the once over. This is where I'm wishing I had a better one. This one's pretty junky. I'm sure you could just sand these off, but I've got the tool, so I'll use the tool. These faces will probably, I mean, it should be nice to be able to sand this out nice and smooth. There's probably a way to do it. You could probably do it with a knife. I'm not going to try and do it though. I don't think it's worth it, and I don't want to keep this job economical for the client. Are there any leather workers out there who would know a good way to clean up this surface, both these surfaces, well, now that they're on the oar? Let us know. There we go, a nice set of leathers. These should last a good many years. Just give these a little coat of some Hubbard's shoe grease just to give them a little bit of a longer lifespan. I think these look pretty damn fantastic if you ask me. They're not the most difficult project, but they do take a few hours. But once you get them done, you've got something that's going to look great and really feel great when you get out there rowing. So much better than those plastic collars. Of course, you should keep them oiled to keep that leather in good shape. Using good leather to start with is a great idea, but if you can't get Latigo leather, don't sweat it. Get whatever you can, even if you're repurposing an old pair of boots, you know, whatever you can do to make it work is just fine. Okay, one last thing I want to remind you of, if you are going to use closed oar locks like this, remember to put them onto the oars before you do the leathers. There are plenty of people out there who I'm sure have forgotten to do that, only to kick themselves later. Make sure that you've got the right size, because they do come in 2 different sizes. You may find that you have a smaller one that slides onto the oars no problem, but doesn't fit over the leathers, so double check that. Okay, that's it for this week, folks. I hope you enjoyed that. Now I want to thank you all very much for watching, and I want to remind you to subscribe to the channel, like and share and all that sort of stuff. And if you can join me on Patreon and help support these videos, then I really appreciate that. And you can find links in the corner or down in the description. Until next time, keep your oars in the water.